David, let's start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
What was the spark for you in getting into films?
It was not really a spark. I didn't. I was never that interested, apart from liking to go to the cinema as a child. I wanted to be a musician. I had a selfish father who said, "No, you can't have a piano because you'll not make any money at that, and you'll make a noise in the house." Then the war came. After the war, I was too old to start to learn to be a musician professionally, and I didn't want to wear a suit, go to an office. So I thought, well, what would be fun? And it was.
It was fun. So
Yeah.
what was the first fun? How did it begin?
Documentaries, because understandably after the war, everybody that had been in pictures before the war had to get their jobs back, so there wasn't really room for newcomers. My father, who worked for the railway, the Southern Railway at the time, found out that they had a little film unit that made sort of training films, and he could get me in there without the union making any fuss, and that's how I started. So I started on a railway film unit.
And you started as a cinematographer.
No, I started as a messenger.
As a messenger?
Oh, not art, yes. 23-year-old messenger boy.
So how did you work your way up to actually being the cinematographer?
Being an assistant, being clapper boy, and all, the best way to learn the job, actually much better than film school.
What was the love about it for you?
The people, really, the crews that you work with, the people are wonderful, as you know, because you're one of them. Yes, it was fun to do. I love the job, but I don't think about it when I'm not doing it. Some people live it 24 hours a day, me not.
You went on to be the cinematographer on some very well-known films. One of the first that I can remember seeing was Help. What was it like working with the Beatles?
You don't want the John Lennon story again, do you? Because you won't be able to use it. I'm sorry. It was like John, far and away the most interesting, the brightest, and for me then actually the best. He was very uncompromising but wonderful. I love John. Paul, very nice, pleasant. George, so quiet you couldn't really tell. He's certainly the only one that was polite. And Ringo, well, was Ringo.
I mean, Beatlemania was just starting there. Did any of that impinge on the filmmaking?
Think about that.
Fans and
not really. No, I mean they handled it very well. It must have been horrendous for them. I can remember shooting at Twickenham Studios, and their car used to come down either through Richmond Park or Old Deer Park or whatever it was called, the roundabout. Then I did through to St Margaret's, Twickenham, and the first assistant could tell whereabout the Beatles were by the level of screaming outside the sound stage. But
you've worked with some very big name directors and some very big name stars. A lot of those stars and the directors came together on Jesus of Nazareth. What do you remember about the making of that film?
Well, I didn't have to read the script because I'd had it rammed down my throat as a child, of course. Franco. Lots of fun with Franco, lovely man.
Franco's there forever.
Yes. Well, there's too much for 3.5 minutes, I think. I don't know where to begin.
We were talking about the Sanhedrin clip. We're going to use that clip.
Oh, well, there were two scenes. Yes, okay, I'll talk about that and you can edit it down as you want. There were two scenes in the Sanhedrin. There was a day scene and a night scene. And I can tell you a story about each, and you can... But I think each one will be more than 3.5 minutes. It's really...
Should we just hear one of them?
Okay.
Let's be greedy and hear.
Well, you can hear both. You're not going to use both of them.
No.
So.
Okay.
Well, the day scene was very simple for me because I just managed to do it with two 10Ks aimed at flats in the ceiling, and it was I knew this was going to do what I wanted it to do, and it's the only time in all the years that I've worked in films that the director had a different idea of his own. Franco had thought about this the night before or something, and he wanted lots of little tiny oil light sources everywhere, and he suggested this. Now, I had the set ready by 8:30 in the morning with my two 10Ks, right?
10Ks, big lights.
Big lights, but just two of them there, pointing up. Franco said, no, I like all these little tiny lights. And I said, oh, Franco, it's titty-poo. And I said, apart from anything else, take till lunch. Then, never mind, darling, I like to see. So I did this. Called him in after it's done. He said, no, darling, don't like. So I said, fine, Frank. And I'd left my 210s where they were. So I switched all those off, put my 210s. It's lovely, darling, we shoot. So what we went with was what I'd had at 8:30 in the morning. Right? Happened to be the first day with Olivier. Right. And poor man, first of all, he was a bit frail, you know, with his illness, and he'd been in since 6 o'clock getting hair and makeup and costume and all that sort of thing. And he now has to sit until lunchtime in this African heat in this heavy costume waiting for me, you see. So he went to the Italian producer and said, look, if this cameraman always takes this long, you ought to fire him, you see. And sometime after that, I always used to, if I was in Los Angeles, I'd always stay with Tony Richardson in his house, right? And I couldn't wait to tell Tony this, because Tony, being wicked, would love it, you see. And one evening, suddenly Tony calls, right? So he said, oh, David, come out, here's a friend of yours, you see. And I come out of my room and there's Larry. And Tony immediately says, oh, Larry, you know Mr. Watkin, the last time you worked together you said he should be fired. That was Tony. The story about the inside, the night, is, yes, it's interesting technically, I suppose. They had built this set beautifully, and they had 3 very large windows, and they had alabaster fret. It was almost like, if you imagine lace, a stone version covering these windows. And in those days, there were very beautiful lamps called arcs, where you could take the Fresnel, which is, you know what a Fresnel lens, it's a sort of focusing lens in front of a lamp.
I didn't, but anyway.
No. Well, you can take that out and you can put a clear bit of glass. You've got to have glass in, because arcs are ultraviolet and everybody'd have sunburnt retinas, which isn't good. So you put the glass in, and then the light source is tiny. It's about the size of my little finger nail. And because you've got such a small light source, you have a very hard shadow etched, right? And that meant that I was able to project the pattern of the fret, the lace windows, if you like, the all over the set. And if you have a look at that clip, you can see it. And that was that was something that you could do then, which basically you wouldn't be able to do now, because those lamps are not around anymore. That's what's the very sad thing about this business: 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I can remember noticing it, because again it was a scene with Olivier and James Mason, and I noticed that whenever Larry had a light, first rehearsal with the lights on, everywhere he paused and everywhere he knew that they were going to use it, both eyes had light somehow. And I went up to him after the rehearsal and I said, I said, I don't have to worry about you, do I? He said, no, he said, I've learned how to find the glories.
Any films that you look back on with particular fondness? I mean, there's so many.
It is the people, again. It's the people where you had the most fun. I think, every film you do as well as you can. I suppose Charge of the Light Brigade, because of Tony and...
Tony Richardson, the director, yeah.
Films that I'm quite proud of. I suppose Catch-22, because of the subject. I mean, I'm all for anti-war films. I think we'll do with a few at the moment. Yeah.
You did, of course, win the Oscar for Out of Africa.
Yes.
Before we talk about the Oscar, but how was the experience of actually making the film?
Again, Africa was remarkable. I mean, the African are wonderful people. It was the best experience. Again, there's lots of stories about it, but I mean, they all take 3.5 minutes.
Well, let's limit ourselves to one. We might be able to fit one. Anything particular? I mean, Meryl Streep, Robert Redford. What was it like working with those two?
Meryl, wonderful. Homework always done. Redford, charming man, very, very quiet, very reticent. I mean, I only actually had one long conversation with him, which was, I was lighting him once and he suddenly looked up, he said, "You must have seen Stonehenge." So I said, "Well, yes." And he was fascinated by it, and I mean, I said, "Well, nobody knows how they got the stones there because they come from Wales, and you know." And he's interested in archaeology. Charming, lovely, quiet sense of humour, very nice man. Liked him very much, but you wouldn't know he was there.
So that one got you the Oscar nomination. Did you?
No.
You went along to this?
No, it got me the Oscar.
Okay.
Well, I presumably got the nomination first, yeah.
What was the experience like?
Um,
Because we all dream of that. What it must be like to be sitting in amongst all those
Well,
glamorous people.
now you're going to edit this anyway. Well, you know, I sort of poured shit and scorn on the Oscars for years and years and years, and my crew always said, "Well, how are you going to feel when you get yours?" You see, I said, "Well, I suppose it'll be difficult pretending I'm not pleased." Obviously, it's nice to get the thing out of the way. You know, you don't actually know whether you're going to get it or not. That is, they don't tell you that they come along because you're going to get it. I happened to be out there, actually, staying with Tony, doing something else. So I went along. And I can tell you two stories. You won't use both of them. But I'm much more pleased with my acceptance speech than I am with the Oscar itself. Yeah, because though you don't know you're going to get it, if you're going to suddenly have to get up and say a few words to sort of how many thousand people are, it's nice to have a basic idea of what you're going to say. And what was very useful to me was an experience that is absolutely true. And I told them this story, that some years before I'd been at a showing of one of my films. In actual fact, it was The Musketeers, the Dick Lester Musketeers, with a friend of mine who was a director. And after about an hour, he touched me on the arm and said, "That's beautiful, you're very clever." So I explained that it was a second unit shot.
You'd had nothing to do with it?
No. And that got I was hopefully that actually got a laugh. Yes, that was my speech. Because I wasn't going to thank United, or thank Universal Pictures and Sidney Pollack, my great aunt, and all that sort of nonsense that goes on, really. You know. So the other thing about the Oscars, which was very funny, and I think you're not going to use this, but I'll tell you. I was sitting next to Alan Davio's wife, who was a sort of very fine, sort of statuesque sort of lady, wearing a sort of midnight blue evening gown, right? And the thing goes on forever and ever, you know. And after about 2 hours, she went to go to the toilet, you see, or the bathroom, as they call it out there. And while she was out the toilet, I got called up to go and get my thing, like the doorstop. And when I got back, she was. No, so I've got it wrong. Scrub it. But I mean, what happened was that I found her wearing a totally different outfit. I couldn't understand this. I can understand people going out to sort of go to the toilet, but not change their entire bloody. And what they do is they're so terrified of an empty seat that the Oscar night is when every film extra in Hollywood has a job, because they're all put in evening gear, and as soon as anybody gets up, whether it's to go and pick up a prize or to go to the toilet, somebody sits in their seat so that no camera will ever see an empty seat. And it just so happened that the stand-in for Madame Davio looked rather like her, but was wearing a totally different dress. I mean, when I got back, someone who's sitting in my seat.
I gather you don't particularly approve of the Oscars, then?
It was nice to get it for something I wasn't ashamed of. It's a kind of political thing. I mean, you know, you look, one picture tends to scoop. I mean, it can be. I mean, it's nice to have, but it doesn't. I mean, interestingly enough, the New York Film Critics Award is actually worth more because there's more thought behind it.
Did it have any effect on your career, though?
No, because you know, every job I was asked to do that the year after the Oscars, every job that was worth doing, I would have been asked anyway. And all the jobs that were on the strength of the Oscar weren't worth doing. Does that explain it?
How long have you lived in Brighton?
Since 1970.
Now you've lived in Los Angeles. You've been to Los Angeles. You've been all around the world. And you could choose anywhere to settle. Why have you chosen to settle in Brighton? What's the attraction of this?
Well, I was born at Margate, by the sea, and I've always loved the sea. Not to go on it, but to sort of look at and sort of swim occasionally when it's warm enough. And when I started in the film business, obviously you have to be in London. By the time I was a cameraman, then it made total sense to live in Brighton. It's the only place. It's the only place on the south coast that isn't dead. The seaside resort isn't dead in the winter. Do you know? And I just love it. I wouldn't even. And it's a great town. I mean, it's so full of decent, liberal, sensible people, isn't it?
And Sussex as well. I mean, we're here at Horston Keynes station at the moment. What's your attraction to this part of the world?
Well, it's to say, I mean, Kent and Sussex are adjacent. You know, it's like a continuation. And I love the English countryside, and you know, I wouldn't live anywhere else.
Are you still making films? Do you want to make any more, or do you look back on it as a retirement?
I made a conscious decision never to say I've retired, because I think as soon as you do that, you're 10 years older overnight. You know, but I also recognise that the business would retire me eventually, partly because it's changed, of course. The nature of it has changed, and that's the two contemporary directors who are my contemporaries that I would have been working with. Franco's had an illness. Maybe he'll do one more film, but I doubt it. And Sidney Lumet in New York, some actress changed her mind at the last minute, and so the film fell flat in its face, and he went into television. Young directors, it would be great to work with, and I mean, I've had cases where people you've really got on with, and you know it's going to be good. But then, you find their producer phones you up and offers you the same money that your clapper boy would be getting. Now, I've nothing against getting paid what the clapper boy gets, provided the clapper boy's still getting paid what he should have. You know, I'm not greedy anymore because I haven't have paid all my tax at last. But, you cannot, for me, I'm not going to work with people that don't know what they're doing. And if you're not going to pay me properly, then you're not going to pay the crew properly.
When you look back on your career so far, how do you...
One more thing to add to that, which I would like to say, if you can, is that what has also happened is that because they've clobbered the unions completely, people work ridiculous hours, and I'm not prepared to do that, and it's damaging to people, and you don't get any benefit from it. So if I did a film, it would be 10 hours, and unless they're in trouble. Sorry.
Just looking back on your career, on the life in films, how do you sum it up?
Had the best fun. I mean, it's what I always say, but it is true that it's one of those few jobs where you actually get paid for being a kid and playing all your life.
One final cheeky question. I mean, more and more people these days are picking up their own cameras and making home movies, and I can't let this chance go away with it, to take the advice of a master. If you were giving an amateur just one piece of advice when they pick up their video camera or whatever, and they just want to make their own home movie, what would it be?
Can you switch off and let me think about that?
To an amateur cameraman, what would it be?
Do what you want to do, not what you think people expect you to do. Is that all right?
Perfect. Excellent. That's excellent.
It's been a joy talking to you. You're
Carry on.
all right. Catch-22, big Hollywood movie, and my first picture in America and my first picture in Hollywood. which I came to despise. New York, another world. Great respect for New York, it's as good as we are. You know. But Hollywood, no. And what was surprising about it was how bad technically they were. And they had this system, a process which is front project, back projection. People will know what that is. They had these what were called process cameramen, whose job was to get a set ready with all the necessary, the projection, the right place, and the camera. And there were two old dears that did this. They were both about 80 years old, and both called Ed. And there was Ed Schneider, who's a very nice man, never said a word. And the other one was Ed Hammerass, which is an appropriate name, and he had a lot to say. And I happened to walk on the stage the day before, when they were getting ready we were going on there the next day, and found that they had done something so fundamentally wrong that, it's unbelievable. Very simple, because if you have a projector and a camera and a screen in the middle, they've all got to be on a straight line. If you have a dog's leg, it's not good. And I pointed this out, I hope, politely, and Hemmerar said, Schneider and I have been in this business 60 years apiece. That's 120 years experience we've had. How many years experience have you had, Sonny, you see? And it was nice to be called Sonny. So I said, well, 120 years experience of doing it the wrong way isn't very useful, is it? You see, and do you know what he said? He said, remember, I vote for the Oscars. And I couldn't see the relevance of that. My assistant could, but I thought, what's that got to do with anything?
So you're not a great fan of the Oscars, but I mean, when you...
It's not a fan of the Oscars. I mean, I think I'm perhaps sort of schizophrenic about it. I do think it is what you mustn't do is disregard the fact that it is a kind of, there's all sorts of factors involved. I mean, there's a very interesting, another story I can tell you. You're going to have, the editor's going to be worked to death. I did a picture once in Spain, and for some reason or other, in an emergency, they had to get in a local an art director who was living there. And this was he's dead and gone, so I can actually tell you who it was, actually. He was totally useless, this man, but he had an Oscar. And what had happened was, on a David Lean picture, and I'm not sure which one it was, I suspect it might have been Lawrence, David had wanted John Box, who at that time was not in the union, and therefore you had to have someone in the union to front for the person who was really doing the job. And then, unfortunately, when the art director got an Oscar, it had to be the man who was in the union, not the man that had done it. That sort of thing, does rather take the sort of icing off the cake, doesn't it? A bit.
But the glamour of the whole thing, I mean...
Oh, glamour's meaningless. Glamour, there isn't.
Wasn't it an enjoyable experience?
Oh, yes, it was fun. It was certainly fun. Oh, yes, I wouldn't have missed it for anything. It was a hoot.
Yeah, I think English cruise.
Yeah.
Shall we get into it? So we'll do a bit more then. This is fun.
English cruise, yes, I could say some very good things about English cruise.
Yeah.
So Out of Africa.
I've moved a bit. I got fed up with that. Is that all right? Yeah.
Out of Africa, directed by Sidney Pollock.
Yeah.
What was he like to work with?
What was he like to work with? He was, I think, slightly disconcerted because I didn't make the usual amount of fuss. Do you know?
What do you mean by fuss?
Well, the Hollywood cameramen are very busy trying to look like cameramen. They're festooned with light meters and pan glasses and things, and they're running around doing everybody. I work very quietly and do as little as possible, so it's the best results. And that, there were two pictures that I did with the two biggest movies I ever worked on, I suppose you could say, big Hollywood movies. One was Out of Africa, the other was Catch-22. In both cases, I liked the directors immensely, got on extremely well with them, but knew absolutely that they wouldn't ask for me again, because the way in which I went about things was almost diametrically opposite to the way they were used to. Do you see? There was a little rider to that, which I hadn't told anybody else actually, is that at the end of Out of Africa, at the end of Picture Party, I was talking to Sidney Pollack and Terry Clegg, his producer, and Terry said to Sidney, "Barbara was right." You see, and I said, "What do you mean Barbara was right?" And Sidney, of course, knew Barbara Streisand, and I had done Yentl with her, and as does happen quite naturally, that, you know, if you're going to work with someone you don't know, you ring up somebody who does know and say, "Well, they like." And Sidney phoned up Barbara and said, "What's he like?" And she said, "He'll drive you nuts, but you'll love the result."
One of the other things I find very intriguing about the film industry is you've got these big Hollywood producers and directors, all this Hollywood money, but most of the crews are British, English. Why?
Yeah.
Why is that?
There's an immense tradition in English camera crews. Not only camera crews, but I mean, I talk about camera crews because that's what I know best. Wonderful, wonderful technicians and lovely people. I mean, I can't say enough about that. That's been the great joy for me, and that's the only thing I really miss is the people. And they come down and see me in Brighton, so I still get.
Great. That's
Great.
fantastic.
Lovely.
Yeah.